I would still say Tun Mahathir. And I actually have a lot of disagreements with him.
This is Shock Life Confession Podcast with me, Reza Abraham. Our guest today is a graduate in economics from University of Manchester, a master in sociology at LSE. He was the former Vice Youth Chief and Information Chief of UMNO, policy officer to Khairi Jamaluddin, and former economic advisor to the 9th Prime Minister of Malaysia, Ismail Sabri Yaakob. Beside his political endeavors, he works as a management consultant with McKinsey, a placement manager at Teach for Malaysia, a CEO at Destiny Oil Services. He's also the co-founder and the co-host of the award-winning political podcast, Keluar Sekejap. Let us welcome Shahril Hamdan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, doctors. Thanks for having me.
So who was Shahril Hamdan growing up?
He was an average guy, boy who grew up in the flats of Shah Alam in Section 8, not very far from, quite a distance from where we're recording. Got confused with where we are at the moment. But yeah, he was just regular. I grew up in like I said, Section 8 PKNS flats. It's a 2-bedroom flat. That's where I spent the first 8 years of my life, after which my parents and I, after welcoming my baby brother, 8 years my junior, moved to Sri Damansara, which is closer to Sungai Buloh in Kepong. So, started off basically like a working class family and experienced a form of social mobility and moved to a terrace house in Sri Damansara in 1994.
Great.
So that's basically it.
So how was your parents? What do they do? Is there any one of them in politics or anything?
No. So no one from my immediate family joined or even entertained the idea of joining politics. Don't come from that family or that kind of family. My mother was a piano teacher.
Oh.
So a freelance piano teacher, taught in some music schools and taught at home. So we had students coming over. My father was working in Bank Simpanan Nasional, which is our national savings bank.
Yeah.
As I think, if I'm not wrong, an IT hardware IT person, if I remember right. He then moved to do his own business, and that's where the income of the family, I guess, went up a bit, and that coincided with, like I said, this social mobility that I experienced. But growing up in the early years, both my parents were not university graduates. They by all accounts did their best to make ends meet, and I have some memory of that. I have memory of my father, because the National Savings Bank was in KL, and like I said, we grew up in Shah Alam. He would go to Jalan Ampang in KL taking the mini bus that doesn't exist anymore, but that was life growing up, and I could really sense how tough it was at moments for them, and I appreciate the struggle that they went through.
What kind of student you were?
Quite a bookworm, or quite a bookish student, not necessarily by choice, but because my mother, who was ethnic Chinese, I'm of mixed parentage, she adheres to the stereotypical Chinese mother.
Yeah.
So she was very, very strict and a very strict disciplinarian in terms of what I did in my spare time outside school. So she would buy stacks of workbooks, which she would force me to do, and she would mark them herself. So I had basically had my own personal tutor in my mother. And that obviously, paid dividends in terms of my exam results from the age of 7. So anytime I fell outside the top 3 in my class, I was in trouble. So that was the kind of very
what would the trouble
childhood.
look like?
Trouble would look like being grounded, not being able to go play football outside with my friends, not being able to watch TV, included some form of corporal punishment, which obviously now is maybe not flavor of the month anymore, not flavor of the year anymore, but in our time when we were younger, I think it was quite commonplace.
You went to Chinese school?
No, I went to normal Sekolah Kebangsaan, normal national school, both in Shah Alam and then in Kepong when we moved.
So what was the age that you got interested into politics?
That was quite a bit later, maybe in my teens. I think towards the end of my secondary school, towards the end of SPM, towards the end of 17, when I began to sort of reflect on my upbringing, reflect on the fact that, like I said, I know this is the third or fourth time I mentioned, but that experience of going from a 2-bedroom flat to a single-story terrace house, that had an effect on me in a way that maybe it didn't have for my brother, because when he grew up, when he was born, he was already middle class, right? Yeah. That move from working to middle class was meaningful to me, because then I got to see this is a different social circle that I'm mixing with. I encounter different kinds of prejudices.
You can connect better.
I don't know about connecting. It's more of like, getting a sense of where you are in what your place is in the world has a lot of bearing in how people treat you, and where you grow up and the kind of social circle you keep will have a lot of bearing on your sense of whether you are accepted or not. So it was very personal. I'll let me be specific. For example, in Shah Alam, when I was growing up, like I said, because I was mixed parentage, I encountered some form of racism. Low level racism, nothing overly nasty, but because my mother was overtly ethnic Chinese, and in a place where that wasn't commonplace, because like I said, we grew up in a working class place with mostly ethnic Malays and ethnic Indians. There was a bit, low level racism, right? Then I moved to Kepong. There's a different kind of community, different kind of social experiences. When I reflected back when I was 17, looking at all of those things, I realized if you're of a certain income, this is the kind of expectations people have of you. If you're a certain ethnic community, or you come from this community in this kind of setting, this is the kind of expectations people might have of you. So then that began to make me interested in identity and why people, what people prescribe about certain other people just because of where they come from and the color of their skin and the groups that they happen to be in. So that was my first taste of being interested about justice, about how to organize society, about politics.
Okay, so what drives you the moment that you say, okay, I want to look into this like very seriously, I'm going to support certain parties, so where was that turning point that it makes it like, because people interested in politics, but what drives a person to go really seriously look into it? What was yours?
That was later again. That was during university. So while I was interested in politics, it wasn't clear to me that I wanted to be involved in any meaningful way with any party, political party. That was after. When I was in university, when I studied economics and politics in Manchester, I got exposed obviously to political philosophy, to political science in that sense of the word, in that loose sense of the term, and got exposed to a different side of politics, which is party politics. Not in the sense that I experienced it as a student, but when I read more about what politicians do, what members of parliament can do, what ministers can do, obviously then I got slightly intrigued about whether that could be a career path for me. Still, no sense of any party loyalty one way or another. That only came in I think towards the end of my university life, when I got to meet certain people from the party that I eventually joined, which was UMNO. And there was a sense that at that time, reform and renewal was something that party was interested in, and therefore I got involved in that and eventually joined that party.
Okay, great. So I always love to say that there's no such things as failing. So sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, right? I mean, the only time that you can consider yourself a failure is the point that you fall down and you never get up. Like, I mean, that's the lowest you can fall. That's the ground. So reflecting on, I want to go forward direct to the point where that was one of the part of your life, political life, that you were basically, you throw your hats into the ring, You participated in G14 and 15. And then, of course, the outcome was not what you aspired to achieve, right? And I'm very confident that, although the result was not what you wanted, but there was a lot of priceless lessons there. And I believe that as a management consultant, we learn to reflect a lot. So what was your key reflections after the result of G14 and 15?
So it's very different. 14 and 15 were very, very different. 14 was in 2018.
Okay.
I was already a frontline politician, but quite kind of junior. I was the executive member of UMNO Youth, and an appointed one at that, not an elected one. So I considered myself more of a part-time politician.
Okay.
That was when I had just left the consulting firm that you mentioned. I started running an oil field services company. So I had a day job, and politics was a side gig almost.
Okay.
A very busy side gig, but still a side gig nonetheless. I did not expect to be fielded as a candidate. I thought, the 2018 would culminate in me being finishing my first term as a frontline politician, again, like I said, at the junior level. But towards the end of that parliament, the then UMNO Youth head, who is now my podcast partner, said that there was some interest from the president of the party, the then prime minister, to maybe field me.
Yeah.
In the seat that he felt was, not really a winnable seat, let's be honest. That seat in 14 was really more of an experience for me. And, there was a very, very outside chance that I could spring a surprise. But I guess everybody sort of understood it was a very, very hard seat to win. So I took the loss, because that was your question, right? Loss in 14 quite as an educational process.
Yep.
And if anything, that experience of running, even though it was 14 days, but it was very, very educational 14 days. Because then I got a taste of what it will be like to be a full-on member of parliament, because in that 14 days, you basically act like one, right? You have to meet people, you press flesh, you meet people, you speak to them, you try and come up with potential solutions on the go. When you meet with them, give them a sense of how you would resolve their problems if you were in that position later on. So that was the purpose of it. And therefore, when I did lose, while I did feel really, frustrated, because once you're in the game, once you're in it, the thick of it, although you expect to not win, you still have, still hold out hope. In the main, it was, it was more of me kind of like telling myself, I could do this, right? I could do this as a career. 15 was different, because after the loss in 14, my prominence in the party kind of increased a bit. I became from somebody who very few people knew to someone that was touted as somebody who could be more prominent in the youth wing, and therefore I ran as deputy or vice chief of UMNO Youth in 2018 after the general elections and won. That was a position that I won. And once you get to that position, and afterwards I was appointed as information head of UMNO, that gave me a national platform, and I became less of a part-time politician. Still had a job on the side, but more active, spent a lot more of my week on politics. And in doing so, in gaining prominence, in speaking more, in gaining confidence, obviously the aim for 15 was to win. Not just for the government to win. And this was obviously also right after I had become economic director under the previous prime minister. So in a national platform, right? And the aim was to win, and I got a seat that was competitive, which was in Malacca. When I say competitive, still not a seat that we had held, but a seat that the majority at the time, I think the deficit at the time was about 6,000, which was a lot smaller than the G14 seat in Kuala Langat. So Alo Gajah, the seat I ran in November 2022, I went in wanting to win, expecting that there was a 50% chance, or at least 40-60 chance that I would win. And it turned out to be that way. I got really close, lost by about 800 votes in a three-corner fight. And at a time when most of my party colleagues lost, I ran the eventual winner quite close. But these are all details that will be lost in history. But that small margin of defeat obviously brought a different kind of pain.
Yeah.
Because then you wonder, what if I done this, what have I done that slightly differently? But upon reflection, that's not the way to live life. And it's, I think, turned out for the best that not only did I not win, but after I got suspended, kicked out of my own party, I found different kind of meaning and fulfillment outside party politics, which I guess we can talk about.
Yeah. So I want to go back to that reflection piece, and I want to broaden the lens a bit. How does your reflection look like? Like, can you walk me through your reflection process? So whether it's a win, whether it's a loss, how do you do reflection?
How do I do reflection? There's this great poem, right? Which is, if I remember it right, to treat both success and failure, I'm sure I'm not quoting this right, as both as imposters. Because it's not necessarily the success or failure per se. It is knowing that everything is contingent and everything is temporary. And you could have a great success or great victory in whatever your vocation is, in this case, the combat sport of politics, and feel an extreme high. But you must know, as I know now, that that feeling doesn't last. That feeling can be taken away immediately. That you can't bottle that feeling. And after a certain success or victory, you will be tested and you will be in for a ride. Similarly, after the extreme low of a defeat, which, all election defeats feel that way.
Yeah.
After you work so hard and put all your heart and soul into it for years, right? You shouldn't get too low, because different opportunities will open up.
That's right.
So I guess that emotional maturity, if I can call it that, I guess comes a bit with age, and it's not just about politics, right? Everyone goes through this in their own walk of life. That is important to me, because to not get too high or too low is probably the best way to react to all results in life, because any other way, you only set yourself up for frustration or a negative surprise.
That's right. So let's look at this hypothetical scenario. Imagine you would have win either one of those contests. What would be the policy? What would be the cause that you would have championed?
Not much different than what I would have championed even now. What I would champion now, which is, if I had to pick one, I care a lot about human capital. I care a lot about how our country needs to ensure its people are best equipped to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow in terms of economic output in more narrow sense. I think our productivity growth is probably one of our problems. Okay. We have productivity growth, but not as fast as I would like it to be. And while there are various reasons for that, one of that is, I think, the kind of education that we afford most of our citizens, as well as the skills training that we afford most of our citizens. So I would probably be most passionate or aggressive in that set of policies.
Okay, cool. So you just mentioned about the suspension, and so you have been a supportive of UMNO for how many years?
I would say 2008, after I came back from university.
Okay, yeah. So it's roughly about 16 years.
Sure.
Okay. And then you have served as the youth chief of the division, vice youth chief, and then exco of UMNO, and a couple of things. I mean, this is the party that you have been basically loved, cherished, and helped to build, right? How has being suspended by the party that you loved, you cherished, you helped to build it up, changed you?
I guess it was a reminder that politics is a rough sport, and to know who your friends are and who they are not, or who are not your friends. I knew that already, but it was a stark reminder of that fact. Has it changed me? I guess if there was any innocence in me when it comes to politics, the innocence is gone. In the sense that I don't hold out hope for people to necessarily appreciate what you do, or take a balanced view of what your positions are, even if they don't agree with a particular position you take, such as in my case, I spoke out against the party leadership. I don't now expect people to react in any other way other than what is best for their own political interests, and that's the reality of the game. But I don't make it. I don't want that to make me a bitter person, which I like to think I'm not. It is what it is, and I rather focus on the great opportunities that have been, presented to me.
That's right.
And God's opened up those channels for me. Now I've got this podcast. I run my own business. I get to influence conversations. If you go back to the podcast and other things that I do, I get to influence conversations, ironically or paradoxically, in a way that's more effective than maybe when I was in UMNO, right? In UMNO, I was obviously information head, so yes, I could speak, but I could speak within the boundaries and the guardrails that were set for me. Now I'm a freer person with a platform, not without a platform, just a different one. Yeah. And I like to think now I should tell myself that this is my second chance to be more myself and to say things that maybe I wanted to say in the past 10 years I couldn't say.
Sure.
Now I can.
Okay. So on your X intro, the two words, a starting point, said recovering politician.
Yes.
What are you trying to recover from?
So I guess it's a tongue-in-cheek remark to how recovering something means that something isn't always desirable. And I think Malaysians right now don't think very, very highly of politicians. So that was my tongue-in-cheek way of saying that I'm recovering from that vocation that I'm no longer associated with directly.
So what's the point where you call yourself recovered?
I don't know. Give it a few more years. If I don't go back to active frontline politics, then I think people will slowly... They won't forget that I was a politician once, but they might... not associate me so directly with that past.
So what should happen for you to go back?
For me to go back, it would have to be on my own terms. I would have to feel comfortable that I would be able to do what I want. I would be able to speak how I want, and not be too hemmed in, which I felt especially the final years in UMNO. Going back to your question about losing in GE15 in 2022, one of the frustrations and with myself is how much I bit my tongue, how much I compromised on what I actually believed in and what I wanted to say or not say for 5 years, thinking that was the right career move. And ultimately it didn't pay off because I still got a seat that was really, really quite tough. I still became... and I say this with all humility, I'm not trying to blame people, but I think it's well accepted that I became, in the end, just like everybody else, many other candidates from BN, a victim of the party's problems and the party's deficit in terms of perception or reality that had little to do with the candidates. So you had really good candidates who lost as well. But they lost principally because they ran under a ticket that people didn't want anymore, which was BN. So when I reflect back, I did a career move, right? I played the game. I, tried not to offend anyone. I bit my tongue when I didn't agree. A bunch of stuff was happening. I carried on in a position, even though internally I was very, very torn inside on a lot of things. Just so that I could get that candidacy and win, and then change when I got into a position of power. And that's what we always get told. Just be patient, be patient, be patient. Once you are somebody, once you are a minister, once you are whatever, prime minister, then you change things. But what I learned in G15 is that some things are, you shouldn't sacrifice everything just to get somewhere. So going back to your original question, what would it take for me to go back? It would take a situation where I felt I didn't have to do that. that I could thrive and succeed while being more myself. I understand politics is a performance. There will be a certain, curation of who I am, maybe less frank and candid like today, but it shouldn't be so much to the point where I felt the way I felt, which is I wasn't being genuine and authentic to myself.
Nice.
And that was an internal struggle I don't wish to go through again. So for me, I'm not so hard up about being a politician or being a minister or being whatever that I would sacrifice that for me now. I need to make sure that it makes sense for me.
Okay. So Malaysia, since its formation, 1963, has held about 10 prime ministers. So what's your top 3 prime ministers that you can name them right now? I know it's a hard decision, but
it's hard because
do your best.
It's hard because people would assign meaning behind all these answers.
Yes.
But hey, like I said, I can be more candid now and worry less about what people think. I think top one for me is Tun Razak. I felt that he's the most consequential prime minister in the sense that a lot of the institutions that we live off today came from his thinking and his generation and his doing. I obviously came from a Malay party. I'm very multiracial in my outlook. I was always to the left of UMNO, which was partly my struggle. But still, I was a member of a Malay nationalist party. And to use that as the base, you look at all the Malay institutions, many of that existed or came into existence, or at least being built to its level of significance under Tun Razak. So I would say him. He also intervened and changed the way we did our political economy to be more interventionist and less, free market, which happens to be a bit of my point of view. Second, in terms of being best, I would say, pausing because I'm really putting thought into this, right? I would still say Tun Mahathir. And I actually have a lot of disagreements with him. I wasn't sure if I would join UMNO actually in 2008 or even before that, because I was not a fan of him. I wasn't a fan of what I felt was really heavy-handedness. I wasn't a fan of the ISA, the Internal Security Act. I wasn't a fan of what I perceived to be anti-democratic measures that he did. As I grow older, I still hold on to those views, although I had a conversation with him during the podcast interview. I find him to be a very sincere person in certain things that he believes in. Still, I disagree with a lot of things that he says, but I appreciate where he comes from. But that's not the reason why I would put him number 2 or in the top 3. I would say he was the best because he put Malaysia on the map through actions that had nothing to do with the things I had problems with. So I had problems with the anti-democratic measures. But in terms of infrastructure projects, in terms of remarks on a global stage, especially on issues around South-South relationship, in terms of the third world, the developing world, in terms of the Muslim world, I think a lot of people associate Malaysia with him. I think a lot of people know of Malaysia through him and through his remarks, and for that, I think the country owes him a great amount of gratitude. So that's why I think he was very, very consequential, and he shaped this country. Arguably, it's a toss-up between Tun Razak and him, whose image Malaysia now represents most. I think it's a toss-up between Tun Razak and Mahathir. Third, I'd say Pak Lah, because he doesn't get credit for this much, and he may never will. He may never get it because of the way history is done and history is read and written. But I think while he was clearly not the most charismatic prime minister, not the most assertive one, not the most inspiring one, he actually began this process of opening up. The press became freer under him. The moves towards abolishing ISA, which Dato' Najib eventually did, started with him. What else? The Judicial Appointments Commission, which basically allows for judges to be appointed more freely of intervention from Prime Minister, began under him. And he didn't need to do that, he did it. And I felt that for that, we also benefit. Malaysia's democracy has benefited from him. Special mention to Dato' Najib's first term, of which I was a fan. His second term, I guess the less we talk about it, the better.
Okay, sure. So outside of politics, who is Hamdan?
Who is Shahril, you mean?
Yeah. Who is Shahril?
Yes. I don't know. What am I doing? Why am I?
Yeah. So you just joined the bandwagon of fatherhood back in 2018, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes. My daughter was born.
So, what kind of father you are? What kind of husband you are?
Yeah. Okay. So this is where the podcast gets a bit more light and chilled, right? I know we said before we got on air we're going to be chill, but it seemed to be quite serious conversations you're asking me. But yeah. So my daughter's 6 years old, 6 in July. She's obviously the best thing in my life. One of the best things outside politics now is that I get to send her to school. I get to pick her up sometimes, spend more time at home with her. So that's been a great pleasure. Regular dad at 6. I mean, she's only 6, so too early. Maybe ask me when she gets more challenging, when she's 15 or something. But outside family life, I go to the gym quite often, a few times a week. I'm into sports. I play paddle now, which if you haven't tried, doctor, you should. It's a new sport in Malaysia. That's quite fun. I play the guitar, not very well.
Does that come from your mother's side?
No, so she was a piano teacher, right? She tried to get me into piano. I wasn't really into it. I regret that because I think it's a fantastic instrument. But I got into guitar when I was 8, so I started playing that. I have not progressed where I should be because I didn't practice enough. But I'm a keen music fan. So apart from sports, apart from loving football and cricket, which is the other sport that I watch a lot, I'm a big music person. So when I say I'm a big music person, is I listen to music all the time. Maybe Ramadan less so, because we should be listening to something else. But I listen to music a lot. I play music where I can. I would go to gigs and concerts a lot. I would travel for it. When I was a student in the UK, I think most of my spare pocket money went to buying concert tickets, sometimes on eBay at the time, which was second-hand tickets, which was quite pricey. But I would fork out money to go see my favorite bands or my favorite musicians. So that's what I do outside the serious politics that people know me of.
So your podcast, I haven't watched all of it, but I've watched those, become more English. It's easy for me to understand. I really like it. Yeah. I like the approach that both you and KJ are taking because it's very centrist and it's what we call it's a moderate ideals form of Malaysia. So you criticize both sides and I love that. I'm a fan of meritocracy. I always believe that hard work is important, talent is important. So whose idea was to basically go for the podcast?
It was, and people always ask this, and the real truth is that it was both of us independently.
Was it like suddenly both of you say, I got the idea? Or
so we both are keen listeners of podcasts. That's the other thing. That's why Spotify is always on when I'm working out, when I'm not working out, when I'm driving. Either it's music or it's just a series of podcasts that I listen to. And KJ and I, we have a long history. Obviously, I worked for him once. But one of the reasons we get along is that we have a few interests that we share, and one of which is to listen to podcasts about politics and about current issues, wonkish that way. So he asked me, have you listened to The Rest is Politics, which is this podcast by one former minister in the UK government and one former spin doctor. So this two gentlemen by the name of Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell. I said, yeah, I listened to it, and I listened to a bunch of other politics team podcasts, mostly out of the UK and the US. And he said, have you ever thought of doing one? I said, yeah, I actually am in the midst of writing something and speaking to another former politician, Ong Kian Ming, to do a podcast together with him. And KJ was like, yeah, you think about that, but why don't we try out and just do one on our own first?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, let's just do that once and see whether, just for a laugh, honestly, just for a laugh, and see if people, take kindly to it. And we were both just kicked out of our parties. We had things to say, and we still had views to give.
Yeah.
So we thought it would be like, once a week, once in 2 weeks, or even once a month, whenever we felt like it type thing. It became more and more serious, and we realized that our audience demanded that there was consistency in output, and we were getting YouTube money from it, from the advertising. And then eventually sponsors came on board, and we realized, okay, it's no longer just a hobby. It's actually part of what we do now. It's part of our life, and it's part of our work life. So yeah, it started off as a laugh. It's grown to become something serious and a business that we take seriously.
Sure. So the name is out there a while. It's already 90 episodes.
Yes.
More than a while.
Yeah.
Are you planning to change the name?
So there's there's jokes in the comment section saying it should be keluar selamanya. Which means out forever. There's no intention of going back. Knowing KJ especially, I don't think he wants to commit to selamanya. He wants the optionality. I'm less, like I said in my earlier answers, I'm less aggressive about wanting to chart a way back into politics. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I'm quite relaxed about the whole thing, and we'll enjoy this ride for as long as it lasts.
So Robert Greene has this book called 48 Laws of Power. It's one of the most fantastic book I've ever read. It's a big book, very lengthy. So he has this very famous law. He said that win through your action, not through the argument. Is that doing this podcast was a form of like, okay, you put me out and I want to kind of like
a revenge gig. So not
I wouldn't say revenge. Revenge, I think, is a very rough word. It's some form of like, I want to tell you what I wanted to tell you.
Right, maybe proving a point. Maybe at the start very little, but now really that doesn't cross my mind at all. Now the podcast exists and stands on its own terms. It will live for as long as we want it to live, or as long as the public wants it to live. And no, I don't have any of these hang-ups anymore. I don't think I ever did, but maybe for the first couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I got annoyed, obviously pissed off what happened.
Yeah.
But now, I don't have that hang-up anymore. It's purely bringing quality conversations, I hope, to an audience that is appreciative of it.
Okay. So there is a trend that a lot of like, especially youth, are very much very much interested in independent podcasting. Meaning that like, you're not going through those main media.
Right.
And
like
you
Astro.
can see,
Like Astro.
Like Astro. So it's on the rise, right? And I think it has started pretty much like people like Joe Rogan,
Sure.
so they started it like way earlier.
Yeah.
So now in Malaysia also trending a lot. What do you think Malaysian youth specifically are looking for?
I think they're looking for authenticity. They're looking for candidness from people who can speak about issues that interest them. And it doesn't have to be current issues like Keluar Sekejap. It can be a football podcast. It can be about motherhood. It can be about, growing up in a particular area, or different pains in different generations. Could be about female or women's issues. As long as it comes across authentic, not mediated by any form of trying to curate or position a overly produced or polished output, I think people get interested in that.
That's right.
Because that's what independent podcasts, or actually what podcasts are meant to be. That's why it's not on TV. That's why it's not on radio. If it was, then it would necessarily be time bound. There's a production value to it. There's a production quality to it. There's things you can say, you can't say. There's a script. There are checkpoints you go through with independent podcasts, or I like to think podcasts in general, even under your, under this brand of Short Podcast and Astro. Presumably there's a level of freedom that is not afforded to other programs under the Astro stable, right? And I think that's what makes it tick. That's what makes it work. You've got to be authentic, whatever the topic or whatever the theme that the podcast is. I think that's what young people are going.
So what do you want to leave behind with the job that you're doing as an independent podcaster?
If we can affect ever so slightly people to look at current issues and politics in a way that's less polarizing, that is more fact-based, that's less emotive, that tries to see the possibility that the other side that you don't agree with might just be right or might have some truth to their position, I think we would have done something. Because I think politics these days, especially in Malaysia, but not just in Malaysia, is defined by being polarized, and people take on very hardline, absolute stances on everything. And you are either with me or against me. You are either of my tribe or you are the enemy. And too much of our discourse is mediated by that lens. If we can ever so slightly, like I said, persuade people to look at it differently, to say, yeah, we can, The Rest is Politics, a podcast that inspired us, has this saying, or their tagline is to disagree agreeably.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to do here as well. To give points of views that you may or may not agree with, but you know it comes from an authentic place, it comes from a fact-based place.
Yeah.
And even if you don't agree, at least you empathize as to why me, Kyrie, or any other guests might bring up a certain point. And that's what the show is about. And that's how we want to persuade. Like going back to that great episode with Tun Mahathir, right? A lot of people agreed or disagreed with him, but I think the authenticity came through. Yeah. And even people who disagreed vehemently with him could sense, okay, that's his worldview. And I empathize with why he sees it that way. I don't, but that doesn't make him a bad person.
Yeah.
It doesn't make him an evil person. If we can persuade people to see the world in those lens, I think we'd have done something.
Okay, great. So to finish things off, we have this quick game called Final Confessions. Which we're going to ask you some fiery questions.
Sure.
You shouldn't answer it very long.
Okay.
Just don't think too much. Just go for it. Okay.
I've been told. Okay.
You ready? So what did you miss the most about being in politics?
Probably some of the friends that I hung out with.
Okay, so what's your favorite conspiracy theory?
JFK.
Who is your dream debate opponent?
I don't have one.
Don't have one. Not yet born, no?
Not yet born. I don't think of it that, yeah.
So what was your favorite podcast interview?
Probably Azmin Ali.
Okay. What was the funniest things ever happened to you during the podcast?
There was an episode with Tan Sri Rafida, and it was funny because before we even started, she started scolding us for no apparent reason. I found that quite humorous.
So, what's your biggest podcasting pet peeve?
Pet peeve? It's bad sound quality. I hate that.
Me too. So, what's your go-to podcast playlist?
The Rest is Politics. There's also a couple of Guardian podcasts that I like. And I'm a fan of these like serial killer podcasts. Some of which I've been listening quite troublingly.
Okay, that's dangerous. So the last question I want to ask you is this one. So if you've been given the chance to become the Prime Minister of Malaysia instantly with all the power, you can do anything you want.
Not going to happen, man.
Let's assume. So what immediate changes would you ask for?
Would I ask for?
Only one. Like one change would you make?
Would I make? And I had the power to make it?
You have all the power.
I would make national schools so attractive that everybody would go there, and vernacular schools would become obsolete.
Okay. Shahril, it was an honor talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate spending time with us. So till our next episode, go out, do your best in whatever you do.